Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of a very cursed daily run with a very cursed character called Cain. And you might be asking yourself, why is it a cursed run? And I think the run itself will answer that question if you continue watching this video. And I'm not saying this just to tease you into watching the actual video, but I'm also saying this because I can't explain it specifically. Just so many things went wrong that at a certain point you might say, well, this is actually kind of lucky. So what I'm trying to say here, right, it's at some points you get so unfortunately unlucky with things that there's no way to explain it other than the fact that you're just lucky. And I think this is exactly what this run was, because not only did I get an assortment of some very bad items, but also an assortment of some very bad pills, room layouts, and even cards to an extent. It just felt like everything in this run conjoined to make itself as cursed as it possibly could be. I'm not calling it bad, I'm not calling it unfortunate, because I think some of the items in this run were actually quite good, if you know how to utilize them, but they just made your life a living hell, and I think this is a very good description of what is about to happen in this run. You might say, well, at this point it doesn't look too bad, because you have actually a really good TPS for second floor, and even going to the third floor, everything is going great. You're right, but of course, because this is a hard mode daily, you have to know that certain things will happen which will screw our plans over, maybe for a lack of a better word. So just stay tuned in, I'll point it out as it happens, because it was ridiculous at certain points. But the hard mode dailies, yeah, mainly in the past few weeks, I guess, I've been playing hard mode dailies on Mondays mostly, which some might see as a competitive disadvantage, because obviously I'm competing against all of the other players who are also playing normal dailies, which means that they are playing generally easier dailies, which means it's easier for them to rank well. Now, I think that's true to an extent, but also I'm considering this as training, right? Do you know in Dragon Ball how they have gravity training? So they go to 10 times the gravity or 20 times the gravity, they train there, and when they come to Earth, they're used to a higher gravity, which means that they jump higher or whatever. Besides that, obviously being how the bodily muscle skeletal system of a human being works, I think that in this case, this is analogous to the fact that I'm mostly playing hard mode dailies, which means that when I finally start playing normal dailies again, it's going to be super easy to just go through. Obviously, that was all a very sarcastic joke, and the real reason as to why I'm mostly playing hard mode dailies is because it's just convenient. On Sundays, I usually record a lot, so I end up kind of not exhausted, but my voice gets kind of raspy. I think you can hear it a little bit now, which means on Mondays, I tend to just enjoy something more low-key. I can just play an Isaac daily run. I don't have to talk while I'm actually playing it, and at the end, I can actually just go and focus back on just talking over of whatever I want to talk about on that particular day. So it just feels a little bit more coherent, it just feels a little bit easier. Now, I know that doesn't have anything to do with the run, and maybe you're not really interested in my personal life stories or what's going on behind the scenes, but I'm just kind of killing some time here so we can actually get to the very cursed parts of this run. I think at this point, I should have gotten an indication that things will go bad because I picked up the Necronomicon. And don't get me wrong, I think the Necronomicon is actually a pretty nice book to have in some situations, especially if you can maybe get it work with something like the 9V or maybe the battery. It can really save you some time and just help you clearing out on some of those bigger rooms that are usually can be quite a hassle to deal with, especially if there's a room where you're gonna be guaranteed to take damage. You can just pop it and basically destroy everything that's right in there. But at the same time, the Necronomicon, besides what it represents, I think it's also a very cursed item. It's one of those items that never really feels good enough. It doesn't really do all that much. Even when you use it on a room full of enemies, oftentimes you're not going to end up killing them because some of them will either be invincible, or maybe what's even the worst, because we're in a hard mode daily, there's going to be a lot of champions. And because there's so many friggin' enemies which have so much HP, those champions are not going to die from one hit of the Necronomicon. And for this item being on a 6-room charge, I feel like it ought to have a little bit more power. Now, I think the Necronomicon is a very good example of a bad item in this game, which could be reworked to be made a little bit more interesting. This is something I've tried to do with one of my mods, or at least one of the items I've modded into the game, and what that particular item does, it's on a 4-room charge. I think it deals a little bit more damage than the Necronomicon, and you might say, well, wait a second, that just sounds a little bit unbalanced, you just made a better Necronomicon. And to an extent, I picked up the whiz there, so it's already starting. Just you wait, it's gonna get worse. So I might be saying, but that's just a better Necronomicon. But you're right, but there's one disadvantage or advantage to using my particular item as opposed to the Necronomicon. So when you use my item, what ends up happening is you get stuck in place. So you can't move and there's a very brief period where the charges on your item start ticking down, and every tick of damage on your charge bar deals damage to every single enemy in the room. So it becomes a much more proactive use of the active item, because you have to position yourself well, because you know that when you use it for the next second or two, you're going to be stuck in that particular spot, and you're not going to be unable to get out of it. But it's as a reward, if you actually position yourself well and use it in the right spot at the right time, you're going to end up doing a lot more damage to every single enemy in the room, and you're going to be able to use it more frequently. Now, this is just an idea for an item. I'm not sure if it's actually good, because I haven't playtested it to an extent. I've playtested the Necronomicon just by the virtue of the fact that this item is in the game and the other one isn't, right? But I do think that a lot of these additions could be made to these items to make them a little bit more interesting to use. I think just one little addition like that already makes an item not only so much better, but it also fits that but that gameplay decision of Isaac, where you have to wager risk versus reward. So in my case, you have to wager on when you want to use it, because if you get hit, of course, the charge gets interrupted, and you're going to be dealing as much damage as you possibly could. And because when you use the item, you're going to be stuck for a second or two, you have to be very careful. You're rewarded by getting a lot of damage, but the risk there is obviously the fact that you will get hit if you're not careful. So, and maybe that sounded a little bit confusing, you would have to see it in action. But in the Necronomicon, I feel like it's really one of those items that you pick up out of necessity and not because it's any good. And sometimes it's gonna help you out. But the 6-room charge, I feel like, is a little bit too much for most items. I think I would tend to reduce that to something like 5, maybe even 4, and just maybe reduce its overall damage a little bit. But even that is not super necessary, because like I said, certain enemies don't even die from one use of that particular item. So, okay, I did say the run was gonna get cursed at a certain point, and I hope that you see that this run already is cursed. So we did switch for Satanic Bible, which is super appropriate, because, again, this is a hellish run to an extent. And by saying, well, but it's your fault, you picked up these bad items, you picked up the Dunscap, you picked up the Wiz, and then you picked up Marked, etc, etc. And you were right, but the reason for that was I was getting frustrated. Frustrated in the best kind of way, by the way, not in the way where I would start rage quitting or anything, because, I mean, obviously I didn't rage quit, I'm still playing the game, or at least I was playing the game when I recorded this. So, of course, I didn't rage quit. So what I ended up doing is, I just got a bunch of HP upgrades from the boss deals, and I just couldn't get any more DPS upgrades past a certain point. And what truly threw me off was the fact that there were so many enemies which had so much friggin' HP or were just otherwise invulnerable, if we were hitting them from a certain direction. So it was very hard just progressing and slogging through the rooms with the damage we had when we left floor 2. And because I had no other statistical upgrades past that point, I didn't get any tier upgrades, I still had very mediocre range because I didn't get any range upgrades as Kane, which can be quite detrimental, especially if you're trying to fight the Hush. So I just said, you know what, the Wiz is here, I'll just go pick it up. I was late for boss rush already, right, at that certain point, and I decided to explore the rest of the floor just so I would get to the treasure room. So when I finally got to it, I found the dunce cap, and I said, well, I think this is very fitting, because I'm the dunce here on thinking that the item room would actually contain something I would want, and because it doesn't, I just had to pick it up out of spite. I'll show the game that if you're gonna give me bad items, I will pick them up, I will cherish them, I will show you that I'm not the one to be messed around with. Maybe that sounds a little bit too menacing than I intended it to, but I just had enough. I said, I'm gonna pick up this item, I'm just gonna show you what I'm made of, and just try to do my best with what I have. So I picked up the Wiz, and then of course the run just kept giving me more fun items, just throw them on there. I found Curse of the Tower, I picked it up because at that point, why wouldn't I? And then I found Marked, which you might think would make this hard to play, and you would be exactly right, because it made it practically impossible to play. What's even worse, Marked actually doesn't work really well in small rooms because your cursor is bounded by the walls of the room you're currently in, which means that you just can't aim at enemies from the right angle, which means you have to go very near them to the point where you almost have to get hit. And because we also have the guillotine, by the way, we also have the guillotine, if you weren't aware of the fact that we had the guillotine, we had the friggin' guillotine. I wasn't really aware where my hitbox was, because obviously when you have that particular item, you're also, everything just kind of gets kind of messy. And when you also have the Wiz marked, and when you have to get very close to the enemies to actually hit them, you can imagine that this resulted in me getting hit a ton, and my damage penalty was just ridiculous and out of this world. But I had fun. Honestly, it was one of the more fun runs I've had in a long time. The Satanic Bible here definitely saved my ass. It allowed me to persevere and get to the end, and I'm so glad I managed to show this frigging game that I can beat it, and then I won't be the one to be messed around with. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does. But in the end, I did pick up Lacryphagy. in the like very last 3 rooms of this particular run, it actually turned out ridiculously strong. Because what ended up happening, of course, I was shooting so fast, I actually had quite a bit of damage, 12 damage at the end there, and I was just dealing so much damage to every single enemy in the room. The tears filled up, they exploded, I had bouncing tears at the end, so everything just kind of died as soon as the tears started amalgamating together. And it was a good run, I feel very passionate about this one, which might be telling by the fact that my commentary made no sense. I felt like I was shoutcasting more than I was commentating, which I think sometimes can be also a pretty good thing. Still, we did manage to finish in the 51st spot, which is actually much better than I thought I would, just because my damage penalty was over 10,000, which is something that doesn't really happen that often anymore, but when it does, I feel like it's something to cherish. It was a cursed run, but we managed to get to the end, and I feel, if nothing else, at least it can serve as something very motivational. Even if the run or life in general gives you something very bad, you have to pick it up and learn how to work with it. You have to embrace it, and once you embrace it, you can see the inner beauty that lies within. So with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.